The 1980s was a golden decade for Saturday morning wonder, bright colors, toy tie-ins, and endless laughter. But behind the sparkle, some stories were too dark, too daring, or too controversial to survive. Entire episodes vanished. Characters were rewritten. A generation forgot them. Tonight we resurrect those shadows, forgotten cartoons you'll never see again. Until now. 1. Transformers, The Burden Hardest to Bear, 1986, edited version. A lone samurai robot kneels beneath the neon glow of a Tokyo skyline. Hot Rod, struggling with his destiny, turns to street life, even riding with motorcycle gangs. For young viewers, it was a rare glimpse into despair, alienation, and self-destruction, shocking in a franchise built to sell plastic heroes. The heart of the story wasn't Autobot versus Decepticon. It was about a boy-turned-leader facing his demons, a metaphor for burnout, rebellion, and the price of growing up. In its original broadcast, scenes of urban violence and gang culture sparked outcry from parent groups. Syndicated reruns trimmed those edges, softening the danger, turning Hot Rod's spiral into a brief stumble. Produced at the height of Transformers' cultural dominance, the episode was buried beneath safer adventures. Critics dismissed it as too heavy-handed, while kids barely understood why it felt different. But for those who caught it, the imagery lingered, a robot's eyes dimmed by doubt, a neon bike crashing in the rain. Today, the censored episode lives in hazy VHS memories, whispers of a franchise that once dared to go darker. Proof that even toys could tell stories about fragile souls. 2. G.I. Joe, The Most Dangerous Man in the World, 1985. A prison cell, a traitor behind bars, and Cobra whispering promises of freedom in exchange for chaos. The episode dared to portray terrorism not as cartoonish spectacle, but as something chillingly human. The central figure, a disillusioned scientist, was no masked villain. He was a man who once believed in peace, but turned his brilliance into weapons. A man scarred by betrayal, seduced by power. It was a mirror too close to reality in the age of Cold War paranoia. Network executives cut entire monologues, fearing they hit too close to headlines of hijackings and espionage. Television standards blurred sharp edges into dull warnings. Good versus evil, nothing in between. But the episode, even in pieces, left an impression. Characters grappled with guilt, loyalty, and moral compromise. Released in syndication, it carried little fanfare. Parents complained. Kids sensed something unusual in its quiet gravity. And then it vanished from rotation, deemed inappropriate. Today, it stands as one of the rare moments when Saturday morning dared to confront the shadows adults feared. And the fact that it was silenced only proves how dangerous truth can be, even in animation. 3. Thundercats, The Doomgaze, 1986. A woman's voice sings like a siren, her beauty rendered in haunting detail. The Thundercats fall, one by one, hypnotized not by brute force, but by seduction. For an era of toy-driven action, this episode was daring, sensual, and unsettling. Chitara resisted, her willpower clashing with the spell. But the tension wasn't in fists or laser swords. It was in the way innocence clashed with allure, strength with vulnerability. Network censors balked at imagery they deemed too adult. Shots of close-up gazes, of near-romantic surrender, were edited for syndication. The episode whispered of mythology, echoing Odysseus and the Sirens. Yet to 1980s audiences, it was framed as dangerous influence. Critics called it inappropriate for children, a rare scandal in the usually safe world of Thundercats. Though softened for repeats, the original cut is almost lost, remembered only by those who taped it off air. For them, it remains a fever dream of color and desire. Proof that even Saturday morning could flirt with forbidden art. 4. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, The Problem with Power, 1984. A castle draped in stormlight. He-Man stands, horrified, believing he has killed a man. For the most powerful hero in the universe, it was a crisis of faith unlike any other. The episode dared to shatter the illusion of invincibility. Adam wasn't just a muscle-bound savior. He was a boy questioning morality, burdened by guilt, trembling under the weight of responsibility. Too heavy for a half-hour toy commercial, critics said. Networks agreed. Future reruns softened dialogue, cut frames of anguish, and replaced raw silence with quicker resolution. But for children who saw it in its pure form, the message struck deep. Heroes could fail. Heroes could doubt. Heroes could carry pain. Released in an age when cartoons rarely risked complexity, The Problem with Power became a hidden landmark, rarely rebroadcast, often forgotten, but unforgettable to those who experienced it. A moment where myth turned human. 5. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Casey Jones, Outlaw Hero, 1987. A hockey mask glints under a street lamp. A figure stalks alleys with baseball bats, chains, and an unhinged grin. This was Casey Jones, not the playful, wisecracking ally fans would later know, but a vigilante drawn straight from the shadows of crime thrillers. The episode painted him not as comic relief, but as a dangerous anti-hero. He punished jaywalkers with the same fury as armed robbers, blurring the line between justice and madness. For children's television, it was jarring. Heroes weren't supposed to be frightening. Heroes weren't supposed to look like the criminals they hunted. Parents complained that the violence was too explicit, the morality too gray. Network executives listened. Scenes of Casey's brutality, swinging bats at terrified bystanders, wielding chains with reckless abandon, were cut for syndication. Later versions softened him, turning menace into slapstick. But those who watched the original 1987 airing remember something else. They remember the raw energy of a character who seemed pulled from a different world, a cautionary tale about obsession, hidden in the bright shell of a kid's cartoon. The impact was lasting. Casey Jones became an icon of the franchise, but never again as wild, never again as unsettling. This early portrait, violent, anarchic, too real for Saturday morning, was quietly erased. Yet it whispered that even in a world of mutants and ninjas, the most dangerous monsters might be human. 6. Jem and the Holograms. Alone Again, 1987. A glittering stage, lights blaze, music swells. But backstage, a young girl hides a trembling hand. She isn't afraid of fame. She is addicted to pills. Alone Again tackled drug abuse head-on at a time when cartoons avoided the subject entirely. The episode centered on Laura, a teenage fan who slips into addiction. Her story unfolds not as cautionary background, but as tragedy, missed rehearsals, broken trust, and the slow unraveling of her life. Censors bristled. Though the episode was praised for honesty, several networks refused to rebroadcast it. The imagery, Laura clutching pills, her vacant eyes under neon makeup, was considered too graphic for children. Syndication skipped over it entirely, burying one of Jem's boldest statements. For those who saw it, the memory cut deep. Jem wasn't just a cartoon about fashion and music. It became, briefly, a reflection of the real dangers facing 1980s youth. Critics later recognized Alone Again as groundbreaking, an early attempt to use animation as education. But its disappearance meant many never knew that Jem once sang about more than stardom. She sang about survival. And that courage, censored or not, still resonates with those who remember. 7. The Real Ghostbusters. The Collect Call of Cthulhu, 1987. A foggy dock, an ancient book stolen from a museum, and a name whispered with dread, Cthulhu. Unlike the playful ghosts of the series, this episode drew from H.P. Lovecraft's chilling mythology. Tentacled shadows slithered through alleys, Cultists chanted beneath streetlights. For children raised on Slimer and slapstick, it was something else entirely, a descent into horror. Parents were outraged. Letters poured in. The imagery was said to induce nightmares, too intense for a Saturday morning show. Networks responded by pulling the episode from rotation. Syndicated reruns often skipped it, as though the great old one had swallowed it whole. Yet for those who saw it, the episode was unforgettable. It suggested that even Ghostbusters, built on comedy and gadgets, could brush against the abyss. The voice acting trembled with menace, the score deepened into dread. It was Lovecraft rewritten for kids, and still too much. Over time, the collect call of Cthulhu became a legend whispered among fans. Proof that even mainstream cartoons once dared to summon ancient terrors. Proof that sometimes the scariest ghosts aren't funny at all. 8. DuckTales, Sphinx for the Memories, 1987. A desert under blazing sun. Ancient ruins loom, and Scrooge McDuck, usually unshakable, faces sorcery that twists minds. The episode wove Egyptian mythology into a tale of possession and control. A villainess named Cleopatra used magic to enslave not just villains, but heroes. Even Scrooge, the heart of courage and greed, fell under her sway. The image of beloved characters stripped of willpower was powerful and unsettling. Censors intervened quickly. The overt mysticism, the near-religious chanting, the hypnotic domination. It was too much for networks sensitive to occult imagery. Several regions banned the episode outright. Syndicated reruns often omitted it, leaving a gap in the adventurous flow of DuckTales' storytelling. Yet what survives is haunting. Scrooge's blank stare, Huey, Dewey, and Louie resisting the pull of a supernatural force, a reminder that even light-hearted adventures sometimes dared to touch the uncanny. For viewers who saw it once, the memory lingers, a lost chapter in DuckTales history buried not by time but by fear of controversy. Proof that even Disney, cloaked in family safety, once brushed against the forbidden. 9. Inspector Gadget. A Bad Altitude, 1985. High above the clouds, Gadget dangles from an airplane wing. But this wasn't slapstick. It was peril, filmed with detail too vivid for comfort. The villain's plan involved hijacking planes, an image far too close to reality, especially in an era of hijacking scares. Entire sequences showed terrified passengers, masked criminals, and explosive threats. For censors, it was unthinkable. Air safety was sacred ground. The episode was broadcast sparingly, then locked away. Syndicated packages often skipped it entirely. To a child, it was unforgettable, seeing Penny's fear, Brain's desperation, Gadget's bumbling almost costing lives. Critics later noted that the episode had an unusual edge. Less comedy, more danger. It broke the fragile promise that cartoons kept children safe from the world's darker headlines. And so, it vanished. For those who remember, A Bad Altitude is a time capsule of Cold War tension, a cartoon mirroring the fears adults whispered about. Proof that sometimes even bumbling heroes stumble into truths networks would rather erase. 10. Silverhawks, The Origin Story, 1986, censored for violence. A Cold Steel Sky. A fleet of half-human, half-metal warriors soar across the galaxy, their bodies glittering like chrome under starlight. The Silverhawks weren't born, they were built. And their origin story, when first broadcast, revealed just how brutal that transformation really was. The pilot episode showed heroes volunteering for cybernetic grafting, flesh stripped away, replaced with metal wings and circuits. Their screams, their vulnerability, the suggestion of bodies. Torn apart, it was unlike anything else on Saturday mornings. Parents expecting a colorful space adventure were horrified. Was this a children's cartoon or a cyberpunk nightmare? Network censors demanded edits. Scenes of surgery were cut down, dialogue about the pain of losing humanity softened. Later syndications reduced it to quick flashes, transforming body horror into a flashy montage. The edge, the terror, the sacrifice, all diluted. But for those who saw the uncut broadcast, the memory endures. It was disturbing, yes, but it was also profound. The Silverhawks weren't superheroes by birth. They were victims of necessity, forced into transformation to protect a fragile universe. The original episode asked a terrifying question. What price are we willing to pay for survival? Its censorship reduced it to spectacle. Yet its shadow still hovers, a reminder that even in the age of toys and catchphrases, children once glimpsed a story about the cost of becoming more than human and less. 11. Brave Star. The Price. 1988. Banned episode. A lonely desert town. A young boy lies motionless, his hand clutching a vial of spin. The sheriff, Brave Star, kneels in sorrow. For a moment, the screen doesn't feel like a cartoon. It feels like a tragedy. The Price was unique among 1980s cartoons. It didn't hide its message behind allegory. A child character, beloved by his friends, dies from drug abuse. No magic revival, no heroic rescue. Just grief. For Saturday mornings, it was unprecedented. Networks panicked. The episode aired only once in many markets before being pulled. Parent groups feared traumatizing children. Syndication packages skipped over it entirely, leaving it a ghost episode whispered among fans. And yet, critics quietly praised it as one of the bravest moments in children's television. Brave Star was never as popular as He-Man or Transformers. But The Price gave it a depth no toy tie-in could match. It dared to show consequences. It dared to say that sometimes heroes arrive too late. Today, it lives on in poor VHS transfers and scattered uploads. For those who saw it, it became unforgettable. Proof that animation, even for children, could speak truths adults were too afraid to say out loud. 12th. Robotech. Force of Arms. 1985. Censored battle scenes. Space aflame. Thousands of ships collide in a final battle that swallows the screen in fire. Pilots scream, lovers separated, cities turn to dust. Force of Arms wasn't just an episode. It was devastation animated. Robotech, adapted from Japanese anime, always carried sharper edges than its American peers. But this climactic battle, the destruction of Earth itself, pushed too far for U.S. censors. Broadcast versions trimmed scenes of bodies tumbling into flames, cities obliterated by alien weapons, and pilots dying mid-scream. What remained was already intense. What was removed was unbearable. Yet the uncut version told a truth. The censored one could not. War is not clean. War is not heroic. It destroys. And Robotech briefly dared to show children the cost of galactic conflict. Critics hailed it as ambitious, cinematic, even operatic. But networks balked. Too dark, they said. Too real. In syndication, sanitized cuts became the standard. For those who caught the original, it was life-changing. Proof that cartoons could rival cinema, that love stories could end in fire, that survival sometimes meant only ashes. A moment of emotional rawness erased by censorship, but still alive in the memories of a generation who saw Earth burn. 13. Voltron, Defender of the Universe, The Sleeping Princess, 1985, censored for mature themes. Moonlight spills over Castle Doom. Hagar the witch hovers above Princess Allura's bed, whispering spells of possession. The princess's body stiffens, her spirit pulled toward darkness. For children expecting robots and battles, the sight of enchantment and violation was too much. The sleeping princess dared to blur the line between fairy tale and nightmare. Allura, usually a symbol of hope, became vulnerable, controlled, silenced, nearly erased. Her teammates struggled not against monsters, but against magic that turned love into torment. It was a metaphor older than storytelling itself, the maiden's will stripped away by shadow. American censors reacted swiftly. The imagery of mystical possession was deemed too adult, echoing a cult panic of the 1980s. Scenes of Hagar's ritual were shortened, her chants cut, the sequence reduced to brief flashes. Later airings softened the danger, making it little more than a damsel in distress rescue. But those who saw the original remember its unsettling weight. It was eerie, intimate, almost gothic. Voltron, usually remembered for robot lions and cosmic battles, briefly became something else, a story about innocence stolen and the fragile strength needed to reclaim it. Buried by edits, the sleeping princess still whispers in fan memories, a reminder that even legends of metal and might can stumble into the darkness of myth. 14. She-Ra, Princess of Power. The Stone in the Sword, 1986. Lightning cracks. She-Ra's sword fractures, splintering in her hands. Without it, she is just a Dora, powerless, trembling, hunted by enemies who sense weakness. For one fleeting moment, the invincible heroine was brought to her knees. The episode's themes were striking: the fragility of power, the fear of failure, the search for inner strength beyond magic. Yet the way it unfolded, Adora doubting herself, questioning her worth, nearly succumbing to despair, was considered too bleak for the franchise's target audience. Network censors demanded edits to soften her breakdown, trimming dialogue that revealed too much vulnerability. Parents wrote letters, uneasy with their children watching a heroine falter so completely. Critics, however, noted its rare honesty. That courage is not the absence of fear, but persistence through it. Syndication often skipped or heavily cut the episode, leaving She-Ra forever polished, rarely human. Those who saw it uncut still recall the silence as She-Ra lowered her head, sword shards glinting like broken glass. It was not a story about magic saving the day. It was about identity, doubt, and resilience. And that made it dangerous, censored, forgotten, but never truly erased. The Stone and the Sword proved that even animated icons can break, and in breaking, reveal their truth. 15. Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Mind Pollution, 1989, banned episode. A city alley littered with needles and shattered bottles. A boy collapses, his veins burning with a designer drug called Bliss. His friends scream for help. Captain Planet arrives too late. Mind Pollution was one of the boldest episodes of the decade. Unlike the cartoon's usual battles with polluters, this story tackled drug addiction directly. Viewers saw characters hallucinate, lash out, and lose themselves. They saw a friend overdose. They saw consequences that could not be reversed. Networks recoiled. The episode aired sparingly before being pulled from rotation in many regions. Parents called it traumatic. Executives feared backlash, but critics praised its courage, calling it a necessary warning to a generation caught in the grip of an epidemic. For children who watched, the imagery never left. It was a glimpse into the world adults tried to hide, told in the language of heroes and villains. Captain Planet, usually bright and idealistic, became a witness to human fragility. Mind Pollution remains infamous, often omitted in streaming releases and reruns. Yet it stands as proof that even cartoons could scream against silence, that sometimes the greatest villain is not pollution or greed, but despair itself. The 1980s promised color, toys, and safe escapes. Yet hidden in its reels were shadows too real, too raw for networks to preserve. These censored stories remind us that animation can carry more than laughter. Subscribe, like, and return, for cinema's forgotten truths are always waiting to be seen again.